back to One Hit Wonderland, where we look at bands and artists known for only one song. But before we do that, I just wanted to confirm, Uptown Funk, still awesome. As I speak, Uptown Funk is still the #1 song in the country, which is great, and it's made me realize what a wonderful trip Bruno Mars is taking us through a neglected era of R&B. Bruno Mars knows his 80s funk and soul, I'll tell you that much. Who knows what he'll get to next? Bobby Brown? El DeBarge? Man, I can't wait till he gets to the 90s. But you know what, I don't actually know that much about the genre myself. Most of the funk I listen to is from the 70s, so if I want to know what it was like in the decade after, well, I can think of only one song I'd use to sum up the genre. This is Cameo. Y'all know who they are, right?
I'm sorry, I don't remember you. What was your hit song?
Word up.
Still don't. How does it go?
Word up.
Yeah, you know them.
Y'all pretty ladies around the world got a weird thing to show you, so tell all the boys and
As far as I can tell, Word Up got a little forgotten after the 80s, but it has really grown in stature over the last 10 years or so, as everyone suddenly seemed to remember how awesome it was. You see it in commercials, in movies, weird metal covers, and yet the rest of the Cameo oeuvre has been forgotten over time. I mean, you really think this band just made one brief appearance and then disappeared? They were called Cameo. That's literally what that word means. But it turns out there was a lot more to them than just this. I mean, people remember the song and the weird fashions. We'll get to that, trust me. But there was so much more, you guys. So much more. And I'm gonna try and sum up all the highlights just for you, because I have heard the code word. And when you hear the call, you got to get it underway. Wow.
no matter where you say it, you know that you'll be heard now, all you sucker DJ.
Before Cameo was one of the greatest 80s funk bands, they were a pretty decent 70s funk band. They started out in New York City. They were originally called the New York Players, but they changed their name to Cameo sometime in the mid-70s. Now, this is the earliest footage I could find of them from 1979, but they had a ton of R&B hits before this and after this too. Here's one of my favorite songs of theirs from 1980.
Shake your pants, and let the vibes come through.
Okay. Here's my keys. Now, like I said, they had hits before this, but they hadn't really made a name for themselves. People said they were a little too much like, George Clinton or the Ohio Players, and they had to change their original name because it sounded too much like the Ohio Players. So, of course, they themselves sounded like the Ohio Players. But that's only where they started. They were not afraid to grow and change with the times. And let's be clear, the transition from the 70s to the 80s was traumatic for a lot of people. Stevie Wonder's peak period, for example, it ends right at 1980. A lot changed real fast, and a lot of acts could not keep up with the times. Cameo was not one of them. First thing they did was they moved from New York to Atlanta. I have no idea why they did that. Maybe they thought the music scene was less crowded down there. But I've heard arguments that, they were the first step in Atlanta becoming the center of black music by the new millennium. Secondly, look, they had too many goddamn members. How was anyone supposed to get paid when you have to divide the check 13 different ways? Now, they pared it down to about 5 people, which, stripped down their sound a lot. But, who needs a full horn section when you have synthesizers? So their sound changed entirely. And in some cases, that would mean they sold out. But not in this case. Where a lot of other funk acts died, they thrived. And a big part of it was their band leader, singer, and drummer Larry Blackmon. He's a very talented multi-instrumentalist who went to Juilliard, but mostly he's a weird guy with a weird delivery and a big old Freddie Mercury mustache. And the whole band was pretty silly and loose because of that, which is how you get albums with names like Knights of the Sound Table and Alligator Woman. Now you may be asking, if they were so successful, how come I haven't heard any of these songs? Well, yeah, there is a reason. Middle America was kind of burnt out with black music for a while. And by burnt out, I mean they burnt a lot of records, literally. The disco backlash was pretty severe for a while, and it got kind of ugly. Look, the result is that almost no black music was getting any mainstream play, and it didn't really get better until everyone was satisfied that disco was good and dead. So if you like listening to REO Speedwagon, well, the early 80s was a good time for you. But if you were Cameo, you could have tons of hits on the R&B charts and not have a prayer of crossing over.
I like the way she walks, I like the way she talks, and she...
The situation got a little better after 1983, after Michael Jackson and Prince broke through, and Cameo started to inch their way towards mainstream crossover success. For example, they had this low-charting pop hit, She's Strange.
She's strange, and I like it. Just the way she is. Walking down the avenue. Always doing something new.
But can I say this right now? She's not that strange. Cameo is strange. I mean, you want to see something strange? Well, I got a weird thing to show you, so tell all the boys and girls. Hey, recognize that guy? Here, let me help. Let's just, well, maybe turn. Well, you get the idea. Yes, that is LeVar Burton himself. Which I get, it makes sense to me. Put him on a song called Word Up, because he's been teaching kids to love words for so long. Like, this song even teaches you how to spell. Word Up was the funkiest hit song of 1986. And if you want to know why that's such a big deal, let's see how funky America wanted their funk that year. Come on, can't we get a little funkier than that? Nope. Look, Prince cannot carry the banner for funk alone. He's a tiny, tiny man. But Cameo proved that you could take the mechanical synth sound of the 80s and still be loose and fun with it.
Do your dance, do your dance, do your dance quick, mama. Come on, baby, tell me what's the word up. Everybody say, when you hear the call, you got to get it underway. Word
If you're like me, you're already familiar with this, but those of you who aren't familiar, you probably have one big question about this song. Screw the song! What the hell is he wearing on his junk? Ladies and gentlemen, this is a codpiece, a popular piece of men's fashion from the Middle Ages, intended to draw attention to and enhance the genitals. It is the Wonder Bra for men. It lifts and separates. No, it doesn't. At least I hope not. Yeah, this was the 80s, the era of awful fashion. Nowadays, Pharrell puts on an overly large hat and that's his thing. But in the 80s, if you wanted a style so ridiculous that it would be identified with only you had to really go out of your way. Flock of Seagulls managed it, but I think Cameo might have actually topped them.
up.
Codpiece is also kind of what's so great about this song. He just didn't care.
Wave your hands in the air like you don't care.
I mean, it's hard to care about waving your hands when you're wearing a goddamn codpiece.
And you'll be heard now, all you sucker DJs who think you fly.
I'm not sure who he's addressing there. I've seen interviews from the time where he said he didn't really like hip-hop, said it was giving black people a bad name. Such is the power of the codpiece. If you're confident enough to wear it, you are confident enough to tell other people that they're the ones that look stupid.
But you got to realize that you're acting like those.
I'm wearing a codpiece. Your argument is invalid. It's a ridiculous, over-the-top song in all the good ways. Cameo proved you could minimize the sound while still being over the top and keeping the groove. It's little wonder that this is the song that broke them through. Word up.
Word up. It's the code word. No matter.
Wait, the code word is word? That's a terrible password.
It's like candy.
I can feel it when you walk.
This is their follow-up, Candy. It did fairly well, actually. Almost broke into the top 20. If anything, it's a little weirder than Word Up. I mean, it's got those glittery synths, but it's also got Cameo's weird, nasally voice.
Giving me a heart attack. It's
And then they've got, like, this jagged rock guitar in the middle of it. Also, I noticed he's still got on the codpiece. Naturally, you wear it once, it's kind of your thing forever. I'm beginning to notice that funk might be a little too limiting a description for them. A weird thing I found out is that Blackman hated being called funk or R&B, at least at the time. Which, you know, I can see what he means a little. There's also definitely a rock edge to a lot of their stuff, but I think a lot of it comes from the fact that the funk R&B label was used to dismiss a lot of acts from mainstream crossovers, so, you know, they were trying to break the mold, at least label-wise. Actually, in interviews, Larry seems really serious and gets angry really easily. If you read his interviews from back there, he does a little Kanye style, talking himself up about being better than everyone and breaking new ground and everyone else is sellouts. But, you know, he had the tunes to back it up, so, you know, maybe he's got the right. Okay, that's funny. And this is their other big single off that album. It didn't quite do as well, but it was pretty good. It's called Back and Forth. Oh man, that's great. I can't even. Next. Oh yeah. A lot. Tons. After this, their albums stopped selling quite so big, but I think they aged into the New Jack Swing era pretty well. Although as the 80s got more ridiculous, so did Cameo. Okay, now this is getting a little bit silly. They also had a more serious song after this about, like, racism and stuff. This is a little bit like when Ludacris decided he wanted to rap about child abuse, but, you know, I'm not complaining. Everyone's allowed to get serious every once in a while. I mean, look, he's taken off the codpiece. When Larry Blackman takes off the codpiece, you know it's serious. But after that, the hits kind of dried up. They made it through 2 decades, but the 90s kind of threw them. They had a good run. Larry also did some production work, most notably for Eddie Murphy's second album, which, if you remember my Eddie Murphy episode, is the good album. And Cameo certainly hadn't been forgotten. You know how I mentioned how Blackman didn't like hip-hop? Well, hip-hop certainly likes him. Rappers have sampled Cameo songs like some 8 dozen times, and those are just the ones I could find. 2 of their members even tour with Outkast. Unless you have literally never heard a hip-hop song in your life, you've probably heard at least like a tiny snippet of Cameo. I imagine the royalties that keep rolling in have softened Blackman's opinion about hip-hop considerably. Actually, they did pretty well. But yes, they deserve better. I actually don't like much 80s R&B, especially when it got into like the Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis stuff with Janet Jackson and all that. But pretty much everything I heard from Cameo I liked. They had the bad luck to break out right when the public was unnecessarily hostile to black music, and if Cameo was only mainstream successful for a brief time, it's not because they were only briefly hip to trends. It's because trends were only briefly hip to them. Cameo still tour, and I think their legacy will only grow in stature as the years go on. Word.
It's the